Hello guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Skills and Abilities. Today we're going to be going over another one of the Sorceress Fire skills, and that is Firebolt. Firebolt is not exactly the most loved skill in the tree. It doesn't really do very good damage by comparison to something like Fireball, but it does have one advantage over Fireball, and that is really just mana consumption. So if you look at the difference between Fireball and Firebolt, Firebolt does 11,157 damage at level 45 with level 45 Fire Mastery. And if you get the synergies, which I believe I also need Meteor to max out the synergy damage, so let me grab that real quick. There we go. So we're looking at about 19k Fireball, which is pretty massive. And then we have 20k Fireball. So Firebolt and Fireball. The difference between them is actually a lot more than you would think. Despite the fact that the damage output on them seems similar, the damage output on them really isn't. Now, as you can clearly see here, Firebolt doesn't really look all that special. It's just a little tiny firebolt that comes out. Kind of reminds me of a spell from D&D. Whereas Fireball, on the other hand, is much larger, looks more intimidating, and as you can clearly see here, also has an explosion, which is the important part about Fireball. So while Firebolt does do pretty significant damage per shot, the issue really lies in the fact that it only does single target damage. So it's 20,000 or fire damage per hit on Firebolt, whereas Fireball has a radial explosion, which I know it says 2.6 yards, but it's actually larger than that. And the radial explosion on Fireball actually does pretty sick damage in a radius around the target. And this is one of the reasons why Fireball tends to be the preferred use case scenario for most situations. So if I'm out here, I don't know, like in the Canyon of the Magi, and I find a group of monsters, what you're going to notice is that the monsters, I already killed a bunch of monsters here. The monsters will take pretty significant fire damage from Fireball in a radius, which basically means you get really nice AoE effectiveness, right? But if I were to take Firebolt and use it in the same scenario, we can get a better idea of why Firebolt is kind of not really the preferred option. Because when you're in a big group of monsters and you're trying to kill, you know, whatever it is you're trying to kill, let's go inside one of the tombs because there's usually pretty big packs in here. And you're trying to kill like a whole bunch of monsters. You kind of want to dish out damage to all the monsters at one time, not just one monster at a time. So you've got to foe fire at one, whereas Fireball, on the other hand, can do this, which is kind of silly. Now, what advantage does Firebolt have over Fireball? It actually does have an advantage. I don't know if any of you guys are aware of it or not, but Firebolt does have one advantage over Fireball, and that is mana cost. So the mana cost of Firebolt actually does not increase with level. So as you reset my character here, and I look at the original Firebolt, you'll notice that it's 2.5 mana. Fireball starts at 5 mana, which is double the mana cost of Firebolts. It also increases in mana as you level it up. So the higher level you go, the more mana it costs, and it continually rises until eventually it reaches a pretty ridiculous mana cost at 23.5 per. However, Firebolt, on the other hand, no matter how high you get the skill, maintains the same low mana cost at all times. Which means that Firebolt is actually the superior choice when it comes to mana consumption issues. So what you can do is you can actually weave in Firebolt into your attacks, you know, especially when you're dishing out single target damage, because Firebolt is going to do pretty much the same amount of damage as Fireball, as we clearly just saw, because even if I go ahead and grab my skills here, put my points in so I can wear my equipment, you'll notice that it's 12,000 damage on Fireball, 20,000 damage on Fireball and 19,657 on Firebolt. So they're essentially the same damage output. However, Firebolt allows you to basically spam them infinitely. You never really have to worry about mana consumption issues with Firebolt because it doesn't really draw enough mana to ever make you hit 0. And as you're leveling up a character, if you're leveling up a Fireball Sorceress, you may run into situations where your mana is lower than you would like. You're running out of mana, whatever it may be. You're fighting a single target, which when you're fighting a single target, Firebolt is probably actually the one that you want to use. Yes, it doesn't do as much damage as Fireball does by a small margin, but it also is something that you can spam infinitely without having to worry about any mana costs. So you can definitely get some pretty good usefulness out of Firebolt in those situations, those single target damage situations. However, as soon as one more monster enters the field of battle, so at any point if there is more than one monster, you're fighting 2 or greater, Fireball then again becomes the higher damage output and the better choice. And it's actually kind of sad because Firebolt is used in quite a few places. So Hydra also uses Firebolts, and the Firebolts that it shoots out also do not have any AoE damage whatsoever either. This means that Hydras tend to be very poor in single target damage as well. There's really not a lot more to go over when it comes to Firebolt. It's not like the most ridiculously powerful skill in the world. It's great for mana consumption issues. If you happen to have some mana consumption issues, it definitely helps out with that. But you're probably still going to be firing Fireball primarily with this particular skill. And once you arrest your mana consumption issues, once you actually get to the point where, you know, you have infinite mana essentially and you don't have to worry about mana cost, well then Firebolt just kind of really leaves the shelf there at that point because, well, if you don't have any issues with mana, then the only benefit to using Firebolt, which is mana consumption, leaves completely. And it has absolutely no purpose. And this is why more often than not, you will see a lot of players not using Firebolt at all because they don't have any issues with mana cost. However, early on in the game, when you are first starting, keep note that Firebolt has such a low mana cost. It is a hell of a lot easier to spam and a hell of a lot easier to use early on in the game when you don't really have large amounts of mana. You don't have a meditation polearm. You don't have high levels of warmth. You don't have a large mana pool. And swapping and swapping back and forth between Firebolt and Fireball can actually be very effective on a low-level sorceress because that way you can more effectively control your mana output. Or you can just chug a whole bunch of potions and, you know, forget about it. Anyway, as always, I do appreciate you guys and gals watching my videos, even when we're just talking about the lowly Firebolt. And as always, keep watching.